The first thing people always noticed about him wasn't his size. It wasn't the weight he carried in his gut, or the way his jumpsuit stretched around his broad shoulders. It wasn't even his quiet shuffle as he walked through the gates of Riverside State Penitentiary. No, what everyone noticed, even if they couldn't explain it, was the stillness, a kind of calm that didn't belong in a place built on chaos, a calm that made predators uneasy without knowing why. He stepped off the intake bus under the cold morning sun, chains clinking around his ankles, and the other prisoners whispered when they saw him. A few snickered at his belly, some nodded. At his size, but one group, the one lurking near the razor-wired fence, they stared the longest. Stay with me until the end. Please, before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. They stared because they thought they were looking at prey. The Aryan Wolves had ruled Cell Block C for nearly 5 years, their power held together by extortion, violence, and the kind of blind hatred inherited from men who'd lived and died behind bars. Their leader, a tall, knife-lean man nicknamed Riker, watched from the yard with a smirk on his pale, cracked lips. Fresh meat, he muttered. His lieutenants looked the newcomer over the heavyset black man with the slow steps and lowered gaze. Big boy, one of them laughed. Bet he's soft. Bet he cries his first night. Riker chuckled coldly. Doesn't matter if he cries. He'll pay. They all do. They turned away, already planning how they would corner him, break him, humiliate him. They didn't see the faint white scar that cut across his knuckles. They didn't notice the rigid posture hidden beneath the slouch. They didn't see the faint, faded tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, a symbol only a handful of men on Earth understood. Because if they had, they would have backed away slowly. They would have whispered warnings. They would have told Riker to leave this one alone. But they didn't, and that was their first mistake. Inside the processing room, the newcomer stood still as guards searched him, tagged him, and tossed him a folded orange jumpsuit. He dressed without complaint, without theatrics, without asking a single question. He simply did what he was told, quickly, quietly, efficiently. A guard glanced at the file clipped to the clipboard and frowned. Name: Daniel Holt, age 42. He flipped another page. Record clean until last year. Then, aggravated assault, serious one. The guard flicked his eyes up. You don't look like a fighter. Daniel didn't respond. Silence was easier. Silence didn't betray anything. He was led to his cell, a narrow rectangle of concrete and metal that smelled of sweat, bleach, and old fear. His cellmate, a jittery young man with too many tattoos and not enough muscle, looked up from his bunk. You knew? Holt nodded once. You got a name? Another nod. The kid frowned. You don't talk much, do you? Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but steady. Talking gets you noticed, and getting noticed gets you problems. The cellmate laughed nervously. In here, everything gets you problems. Daniel didn't answer. He folded his blanket carefully, lined his shoes under the bed, arranged his toiletries into perfect rows. His cellmate blinked. You army or something? A flicker behind Daniel's eyes, a shadow of memory, a desert sky, the thump of helicopter rotors cutting through night. A door kicked open, shouts, gunfire, men screaming orders, moving as one, something like that. He murmured. The first day passed quietly. He kept to himself in the cafeteria, choosing a corner seat, away from the crowd. He ate slowly, observing faces, movements, behaviors, alliances. He didn't stare. He didn't linger. But he saw everything. And everything saw him, especially Riker. The Aryan Wolves sat at their usual table, their boots up, tattoos showing, eyes cold. Riker leaned forward, studying Daniel with the same amused expression a lion might wear watching a calf stumble too close. Look at him, Riker muttered to his crew. Soft, clumsy, slow. One of the wolves elbowed another. Bet he folds if we bump him. Nah. Another replied, grinning. Bet he folds if we breathe too hard. Riker's smile sharpened. We'll test that tomorrow. And so, the trap began forming long before Daniel even finished his meal. Night fell. Lights out alarms rang down the block. Daniel lay on his bunk, staring at the rusty springs above him. His cellmate breathed unevenly below. But Daniel didn't sleep easily. Sleep brought back too much. Cold nights in foreign deserts. Screams muffled by explosions. The sound of boots pounding on dirt as he sprinted toward the wounded. The vibration of a rifle tight against his shoulder. The voice of his squad leader telling him to push forward. Marine Raiders didn't forget. They carried every ghost with them, but prison wasn't war. And yet, it smelled like it. It felt like it. That faint electric tension before violence erupted. Morning came harsh and unforgiving. As guards barked orders and prisoners shuffled out for chow, Daniel blended into the line. Quiet as always. Today was the day the wolves would test him. He sensed it before he saw them. A wrongness in the air, eyes lingering too long. Inmates shifting positions subtly, making space for violence. He carried his tray to his usual corner and sat. The hall echoed with voices low, threatening, hungry. Then the voices cut off, because Riker and his crew were approaching. 5 of them, a formation to practice to be random. 1 in front, 2 angled slightly behind, 1 flanking left, 1 flanking right. Classic intimidation tactic, classic encirclement. Daniel didn't lift his head. He didn't tense. He didn't signal that he noticed them. He simply took another bite of his eggs. "Hey, big boy," Riker growled, stepping up to the table. "You're sitting in our spot." Daniel chewed, swallowed, lifted his eyes slowly. "I didn't see your name on it." A few inmates nearby winced. Talking back was dangerous. Talking back to Riker was suicidal. Riker leaned forward, breath sour, eyes filled with hatred. "You knew. So I'll make this simple. You pay us, you sit where we tell you to sit, you walk where we tell you to walk, and you shut your mouth unless we tell you to speak." Daniel didn't blink. He didn't show fear. He didn't move, not interested. He said softly, Riker's jaw flexed, "You don't get to say no." One of the wolves snatched Daniel's tray and slammed it onto the ground. Eggs splattered across the floor. The entire cafeteria went silent. Daniel didn't move. He just breathed slow, steady, controlled. Riker mistook that stillness for fear. Predators often did. "You hearing me now?" Riker taunted. "Or do I need to teach you how things work?" Daniel finally stood. Inmates sucked in breaths. Not because he was big. They'd seen plenty of big men fold. They reacted because of how he moved, not fast, not aggressive, not panicked, but deliberate, balanced, grounded, like a man who'd been trained to move under gunfire. He stepped forward until he was inches from Riker. The wolves bristled, expecting a fight. But Daniel didn't swing, didn't threaten, didn't curse. He just spoke words that froze the blood of every man within earshot. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Walk away." Riker laughed. The wolves laughed. Then Riker reached for Daniel's shirt and everything changed. The cafeteria didn't see a fat man anymore. They saw a blur. Daniel's left hand snapped up, trapping Riker's wrist in an iron grip. His right forearm dropped with brutal precision, striking the nerve cluster along Riker's forearm. The gang leader gasped, knees wobbling. Before the wolves could react, Daniel pivoted, weight shifting, hips turning, strike flowing like a perfectly rehearsed drill. Riker hit the table edge with a sickening thud, collapsing to the ground. Gasps erupted. Silverware clattered. Dozens of inmates froze in disbelief. The fat guy moved like nothing they had ever seen. One of the wolves lunged, swinging wildly. Daniel stepped inside the arc of the punch, placed 2 fingers behind the attacker's elbow, and drove down. A pop, a scream, an arm bending the wrong way. Another rushed him. Daniel sidestepped, hooked the man's ankle, and dropped him with a sweep so fluid it looked like dance. 3 men down. In under 5 seconds, the cafeteria erupted into chaos, shouts, panic, guards yelling. Daniel stood over Riker, calm as winter rain. "This is me being polite," he murmured. Riker stared up at him, chest heaving, horror dawning. Daniel leaned down. "I asked you to walk away." For the first time since entering prison, the Aryan Wolves understood something they should have seen from the start. This wasn't prey. This was a former Marine Raider, a man trained to end fights before. They began. Daniel turned, walked away, sat back down in his corner. The cafeteria stayed silent for nearly 10 seconds before noise slowly returned. But nothing felt the same. Everyone knew a storm had arrived. And the wolves, they had no idea just how badly they'd miscalculated. The silence that followed the cafeteria incident didn't last long. In prison, news traveled faster than contraband. By the time Daniel Holt returned to his cell block, whispers had already spread across every tier. Big Dude folded Riker. No way, man. Riker's a psycho. He put down 3 wolves like it was nothing. Who the hell is that guy? Some stories exaggerated his strength. Others added details he knew weren't true. But all of them carried the same message. This new inmate wasn't. Daniel walked through the corridor with the same quiet, deliberate steps. But now, heads turned as he passed. Men who had looked at him with predatory smirks the day before now kept their eyes down. Even the correctional officers watched him. Differently, not with fear, but with interest. Because officers had seen everything in their years inside. Fighters, gangsters, maniacs, and monsters. But what they witnessed in that cafeteria, that was something else. Something controlled. Something surgical. Something that didn't belong in a state prison. And everyone knew Riker wasn't going to let the humiliation go unanswered. Night fell hard inside cell block C. The overhead lights cut off with a metallic buzz, leaving only the dim glow of hallway lamps. Daniel lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, muscles relaxed, but mind alert. His cellmate, Ty, peeked up nervously from below. "You, going to be okay?" Ty whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He listened first. Something he'd learned long ago. Listen for feet, for breathing, for whispers, for danger. Then he turned his head. "I'll be fine." Ty swallowed hard. "Riker won't stop, man. He's calling in favors. People saying the wolves are planning something tomorrow, something big." Daniel nodded once. "I know." Ty stared. "You know." Daniel didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because everything about the wolves' behavior today had screamed of retaliation. They were predators, but sloppy, predictable, emotional, and emotional men make mistakes. Daniel, on the other hand, was a professional. He'd spent years in foreign war zones studying enemy behavior, anticipating ambushes, planning counterattacks. Riker was loud, angry, impulsive. Daniel was patient, and patience always won. Around midnight, Daniel rolled onto his side, closing his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He entered that half-aware mental state every raider learned to master. On deployment, trusting the body, sharpening the mind. He counted breaths, counted sounds, counted the hours until morning, because he knew what was coming. The next day dawned cold and gray, sunlight barely piercing the high windows. When the doors clanged open for morning chow, Daniel felt the shift immediately. The yard was wrong. Too many wolves gathered near the fence. Too many men moving in clusters. Too many eyes watching him with poorly disguised anticipation. Riker himself wasn't present. The coward always let others do the dirty work, but his lieutenant, Drake, stood at the center of the group, jaw clenched, lip curled. Drake was everything. Riker pretended to be big, muscular, fearless, and stupid. The kind of man who thought violence alone made him powerful. The perfect weapon for a man like Riker. Daniel stepped into the yard, hands loose at his sides, breathing steady. He scanned the area like a drone sweeping a battlefield. 15 wolves, 6 unaffiliated inmates hanging back, likely bribed. 3 men from another gang waiting near the weight pile, ready to block guard sightlines. 2 lookouts stationed by the tower blind spot. A full ambush. Sloppy. Predictable. Daniel sat on a bench, elbows on his knees, as if enjoying the cold morning air. The wolves spread out, circling him like hyenas. Ty, watching from the doorway, trembled. "Don't," he whispered to himself. "Don't do it. Don't go out there." But Daniel was already committed. He didn't walk into danger unknowingly. He walked into it because it was necessary. Because sometimes peace only came after the storm. Drake cracked his knuckles loudly. "You think you're something, huh?" he snarled. "Heard you put down Riker yesterday. Think that makes you top dog?" Daniel didn't answer. Drake smirked. "What's wrong? Got your tongue?" Daniel finally looked up, his expression calm. "You don't want to do this, the wolves laughed. Drake stepped closer. No, fat boy, we really do. Two men moved behind Daniel. Another approached from the side, hand hidden in his sleeve, likely holding a shank. The wolves closed an inch by inch. Daniel sighed quietly. They had no idea what they were walking into. Drake swung first, fast and wide. A looping punch meant to crush bone. But Daniel wasn't there. He moved with fluid precision, ducking as Drake's fist cut through empty air. Daniel's elbow shot upward, catching Drake under the chin. The bigger man's head snapped back with a crack. Before he fell, Daniel pivoted. Another attacker lunged with a shank, blade glinting. Daniel sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and snapped it like dry wood. The shank fell. Daniel caught it mid-air, flipped it in his grip, drove it into the ground beside the man's head, close enough to scare him sober. To down. The others charged. Daniel flowed through them like a storm through a forest. A knee strike to the ribs, a palm strike under a jaw, a forearm across a throat, a sweep that sent a man crashing into the dirt. He moved without hesitation, without anger, without fear, just perfect efficiency. 8 seconds. 6 men down. Drake stumbled to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. What are you?" he gasped. The wolves hesitated, predators reconsidering prey. Daniel rolled his shoulders. "I'm someone who asked for peace." Drake roared and charged blindly. Daniel sidestepped and delivered a single punch, short, compact, devastating. It landed just below Drake's sternum, hitting the celiac plexus. Drake collapsed instantly, unable to breathe. Daniel crouched beside him. "I told your leader to walk away," he said softly. "You should have done the same. Round them." The wolves stared, trembling, unsure whether to run or fight. None found the courage to do either. Guards rushed in late as always, shouting orders, tackling men who weren't even moving. Daniel stood quietly, hands raised, allowing himself to be cuffed without resistance. The officers dragged him toward the segregation hallway, but something strange happened. The prisoners, all of them, moved aside respectfully. No jeers, no threats, just silence. Not fear. Respect. Even the guards exchanged glances. One leaned closer and muttered, "You're not like the others, Holt." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because today proved what everyone now knew. Daniel Holt wasn't a man to challenge. He was a man to avoid, a man to respect, a man to fear. And somewhere in the prison, Riker was shaking, not with rage, but with realization. His gang wasn't powerful anymore. Not here, not now, because there was a new force inside Riverside. And he wore an orange jumpsuit. They'd pushed the wrong man, a man trained to dismantle squads, a man who survived battles others didn't, a man forged in fire and blood, a man the world once called Marine Raider. Solitary confinement was never completely silent, even behind thick metal doors and concrete walls. The prison hummed like a living beast, distant yelling, footsteps echoing down the tier, the faint electric buzz of the overhead lights. Daniel Holt sat on the narrow cot with his back straight and eyes half closed, breathing slow, controlled. Solitary didn't bother him. It reminded him of something old, something familiar. A waiting room before violence, a quiet between storms. He'd spent entire nights inside desert hideouts, listening for enemy movement, conserving energy, letting his mind sharpen like a blade. This was no different. The walls might have changed, but the discipline hadn't. He counted each breath, each heartbeat, each heart. Until finally, after what felt like a day and a half, the door clanged open. Two guards stood waiting. One of them, Officer Ramirez, narrowed his eyes. "You're being moved," he said. "Warden's orders." Daniel stood calmly. If the warden wanted a word, it usually meant trouble or opportunity. But as he stepped out, he saw the shift immediately. Inmates across the block stared, not with curiosity, not with amusement. With caution, with respect, with something like awe. Word of the yard ambush had spread. The wolves hadn't just lost, they'd been dismantled. Riker's power, once unquestioned, was bleeding out like a wounded animal. And Daniel had stepped into a space no one expected. Ramirez led him through the corridors, past the chow hall, past the medic wing, past the cage where inmates sat in restraints. They finally stopped in a small office where a heavyset man with tired eyes sat behind a metal desk. Warden Nichols. He motioned at the chair. Sit. Daniel remained standing. I prefer to stand, he said politely. The warden sighed. Fine. Makes no difference to me. He folded his hands, eyes sharp. 3 days in this place, and you've already put half of Riker's crew in the infirmary. I've been running prisons for 22 years. Never seen anything like it. Daniel said nothing. I watched the footage, Nichols continued. You weren't reacting emotionally. You were calculating. Efficient, very precise. His eyes narrowed. That's military training. High-level training. Daniel remained silent, not denying, not confirming. Marines didn't brag. They didn't explain. They endured. Nichols leaned back. Listen. Holt, I don't know how the hell a man like you ends up here. But I can tell you one thing. You've made waves big enough that other facilities have already heard your name. You've upset the balance. And men like Riker don't take humiliation lightly. Daniel spoke quietly. Humiliation was his choice. The warden nodded slowly. That may be. But choices have consequences. And Tank. Riker has one of the largest prison networks in the state. His influence doesn't stop at the yard fence. Daniel didn't flinch. The warden continued. He's not done with you. He's regrouping. Planning something bigger. Something uglier. Daniel breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth. I figured. Nichols rubbed his temples. You're one man, Holt. One man against it. The warden studied him for a long time. Finally, he exhaled. I'm transferring you out of segregation. Back to general population. But Holt, he paused. Watch your back. When Daniel returned to cell block C, the atmosphere changed like a cold wind sweeping through the concrete halls. Conversations died as he walked past. Some men stared openly. Some nodded respectfully. Others quickly stepped out of his way. Big Jim, the old-timer from the neighboring block, approached him with a half-smile. Leaning on his cane, Marine, he grunted. You stirred up a whole hornet nest. You know that, right? Daniel shrugged. Slightly. They attacked me. Big Jim chuckled. And you beat their souls out their bodies. You aren't wrong, but you aren't invisible either. Wolves licking their wounds don't stay quiet long. He tapped his cane on the floor. You need allies. Nobody survives alone in here. Daniel's voice stayed calm. I didn't come here to build alliances. Yeah, Jim said, and I didn't come here to get old. But life don't care. He lowered his voice. Wolves got new leadership filling the gap. Some new kid from another facility. Name's Lawrence Lobo Haynes. Smart, unpredictable. Isn't like Riker. Daniel remained still, absorbing the information. Jim continued. This one isn't going to send fools to test you. He'll study you, ambush you when you least expect it. Daniel looked toward the yard. I'll be ready. Jim sighed. Hope so, Marine. Hope so. That afternoon, the yard filled with the usual noise, weights slamming, basketballs bouncing, inmates shouting, deals being whispered in corners. But there was tension underneath it all. Wolves gathered near the far fence. Whispers traveled like wind. Every man on the yard felt something coming. Ty nervously approached Daniel. They're moving, man, he whispered. Lobos with them. They're planning something. They brought in dudes from 2 other blocks. This isn't like before. Daniel nodded. He'd already sensed it. Predators weren't subtle. He stood, stretching his shoulders. Go inside. Ty froze. What? Go. Now. Ty swallowed hard and walked away, looking back over his shoulder in worry. Daniel walked toward the center of the yard, exposed, alone, visible from every angle. He wanted them to come, wanted them to feel confident, wanted them to underestimate him. Again. He sat on a bench, elbows resting on his knees, and he waited. Minutes passed. Then more. Until finally, a group of 20 men exited the building with purpose. Not chaotic, not sloppy. Organized. Lobo walked at the front, a young white man with close-cropped blonde hair, prison tattoos, and predator's eyes. He wasn't as strong as Drake, not as imposing as Riker, but something in his walk told Daniel this one was different. Calculated, cold, almost professional. Lobo stopped 15 feet from him. You're the fat Marine, he said calmly. Daniel didn't deny it. Lobo tilted his head. Riker told me you're dangerous. Daniel stared back. Riker was right. Lobo smiled slightly. Good. I like a challenge. He gestured. Hurt him. The wolves spread out in a tight formation, a semicircle closing in around Daniel. Not reckless this time. Coordinated. 3. Men rushed from the left to from the right, from the front. A chokehold attempt from behind. Someone with a razor shank hidden inside his sleeve. A perfect encirclement. To perfect. Daniel moved first. Not with panic. Not with hesitation. With purpose. He stepped forward into the closest attacker, breaking the formation instantly. His first crashed into the man's throat, cutting off his oxygen. Before the body hit the ground, Daniel pivoted, hooking another man's ankle and dropping him with a brutal twist. Someone swung from behind. Daniel ducked, grabbed the arm, and flipped the man over his shoulder. A shank flashed. Daniel trapped the attacker's wrist between his palms, rotated, and slammed it into another wolf's face. A spray of blood. A scream. Chaos. But Daniel didn't feel chaos. He felt clarity. Every move flowed into the next strikes, blocks, counters. He redirected weight, used momentum, fought with deadly precision. 6 men down. 4 running away with broken bones. 3 crawling across the dirt. The yard trembled around him. But Lobo didn't move. He watched with cold fascination. Finally, he stepped forward, cracking his neck. You don't fight like a man. You fight like a weapon. Daniel breathed deeply. And you don't lead like Riker. You lead like a fool. Lobo smirked. Let's see who walks away. He lunged fast, trained, efficient. Daniel blocked, parried, countered. Lobo moved like someone who'd seen violence before. Someone who knew how to punch, how to grapple, how to improvise. But he wasn't Daniel Holt. Holt feinted to the left. Lobo took the bait. Holt's right fist snapped forward. Lobo blocked, only for Holt to pivot low, sweeping his legs. Lobo hit the dirt hard. He rolled, sprang up, swung wildly, but Holt stepped inside the punch and delivered a brutal elbow strike to the jaw. Lobo crumpled. Silence fell across the yard. Guards swarmed. Men backed away. Medical staff rushed in. Daniel stood over Lobo, breathing steady. He didn't gloat, didn't threaten, didn't smile. He simply said, respect is earned, not stolen. And every man in the yard knew the wolves had lost their crown. Daniel Holt wasn't just an inmate anymore. He was the apex, a man forged in war, tempered in violence, and rebuilt through discipline. A man no gang could break, no coward could intimidate, no leader could ignore. The prison would never forget his name, because sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one everyone thinks is harmless. And Daniel Holt, the heavyset, quiet, unassuming ex-Marine raider, was the most dangerous man Riverside had ever seen. One man can change a battlefield.